me immensely with organising this event. Before we begin, Macquarie University Law Society would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Macquarie University land, the Wadawurrung clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the Dreamtime. We pay our respects to our elders, past and present. Additionally, please note that tonight's session is recorded for all of those students who could not attend today. If you do not wish to be recorded, please turn your video off. All of the guests should be muted at all times while the speakers are speaking. Later in the evening, there will be an opportunity for students to ask questions. So please unmute yourselves to ask these questions. Alternatively, you could drop your questions in the chat box as well, and Imogen will take over and ask them for you. Also, please note that our MALS equity policy and Macquarie Student Code of Conduct applies to this event.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome to our first speaker night for the year. So we're here this evening with a very highly distinguished panel who we are very honoured to have with us to present their journeys and insights on this area of law, as well as to discuss how we can assist the law to better support the rights of the LGBTIQ+ community. So with us here today, we have the Honourable Michael Kirby, who really needs no introduction, but as we all know, he has served as Justice of the High Court of Australia and President of the New South Wales Court of Appeal, as well as undertaken many international initiatives, including with the United Nations Human Rights Council. Thank you, Your Honour, for your presence, and I'm sure all of the students are very eager to hear your thoughts. Next, we have Danny King. Danny is an incredible pioneer in the employment law industry, where she is partner of Danny King Legal, an award-winning boutique employment law firm in Sydney CBD. As well as being the founder of Danny King Legal, Danny has casually convened the employment law course at UNSW, presented many seminars and workshops for organisations such as the College of Law and Employee Matters. Thank you, Danny, for coming here tonight, and we are really excited to hear more about your journey. Next, we have Ghassan Kassisieh. Ghassan, as the Legal Director of Equality Australia, has been involved in over a decade of LGBTIQ+ advocacy, alongside a commercial litigation career in Australia and overseas. In 2007, he was named as the youngest member of the same 25 most influential lesbians and gay men in Australia. So thank you, Ghassan, for joining us this evening. And finally, we have Nicholas Stewart. So Nicholas is a partner at Dowson Turco Lawyers, an out loud and proud law firm servicing all communities across Sydney. He also sits on the Executive Management Committee and is co-chair of the LGBTI subcommittee at Australian Lawyers for Human Rights. Nicholas is currently working to bring about a judicial commission to look at agency responses to LGBTI hate crimes in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Once again, thank you for joining us, Nicholas. We are very appreciative that you could make it tonight.
So with that, let's get started with our discussion. And, this is really open to all the panel members, as we're all here to learn and become stronger and more educated advocates for this very, very important cause. So one thing that is really important when discussing diversity and, discussing this issue is the way we communicate diversity. So how would you go about assisting allies and even members in the community to find the appropriate language when advocating for diversity of gender and sexuality? Open to anyone.
I'll go first.
I think the first step is visibility. When I was young, when I was at law school, I was, sexually speaking, invisible. And that was what I was expected to be. And that lasted an awful long time. And that was what was expected to be. And had I not been invisible in respect of my sexual orientation, there is no way I would be speaking to you as a person who has held high judicial offices in Australia and ultimately on the High Court of Australia, which led on to all sorts of other very interesting and important activities, including in the United Nations. Some people have said to me, "Oh, I was your best friend and you didn't tell me. You were so nasty and secretive." But the fact of the matter was that I was playing by the rules that society had laid down. They didn't mind that there were gay people out there. They knew that there were gay people out there. But the deal was, you keep very, very quiet about it. You be very, very ashamed of yourself about it. Never mention it at all. Keep it completely bottled up, and we'll pretend to look the other way. We'll know you're out there, but we won't be too horrible to you. We'll just be mildly horrible. And I remember the very moment that I was first brought face to face as a young man in this law school at Sydney University with unnatural offences. We were taught criminal law by Mr. Vernon Triet, QC. He had been the Liberal leader in the New South Wales Parliament, and he was a good lecturer, and he came to that chapter in the criminal law, the Crimes Act New South Wales, which dealt with unnatural offences, the unmentionable offence of buggery and all the other horrible paraphernalia. Even the language was pretty horrible. It was all designed to be nasty, horrible, murky, and something you should be ashamed of. And I remember I began to blush. I began to feel very uncomfortable. I asked myself, do you think anyone here knows? Do you think anybody knows about me? Um, my parents didn't know. My brothers didn't know. My sister didn't know. My grandmother didn't know. But maybe someone here knows. But I was a pretty good actor, and I was keeping very low below the radar. And it was still a pretty horrible moment when I learned what the Crimes Act provided. And that remained for most of my life until the year 1974 in New South Wales, when the Crimes Act was changed. Nothing really could happen, nothing much could happen on gay rights before the Crimes Act was changed, because that was the formula that, even where it wasn't enforced, gave the community, the religious community and the secular community, the right to be nasty to gay people and to require them to hide their truth. And that began to change in 1972 in South Australia under a Liberal government. And it began to change in other jurisdictions of Australia, ultimately, finally, in Tasmania in 1997, when that law changed its criminal code. Uh, so that began the process of change, and it went on to other changes in the law, in the anti-discrimination law, in marriage equality, and I pay great tribute and respect to Hassan and to Nicholas and to Danny and others who worked for that objective. And ultimately, I got married. There is my wedding ring, and we did it in a very political way. Actually, we got married on exactly the 50th anniversary of when we had first met. That was sort of giving a signal. Well, you guys out there, you kept us from this for 50 long years, but we were still together after 50 years, and all the impediments and all the restrictions, we were still there. And I've got to go home tonight. I've got to leave you at 8 o'clock. So any questions for me, you've got to advance and ask before I go, because my partner Johan is from the Netherlands. They are very difficult people. They are very punctual people. And I normally get home by 7:30, but I said tonight it's going to be 8:30. He's got a bowl of soup waiting for me, and I will perish unless I have it. But the big issues now are remaining to be attended in Australia. One of them I was looking at today, a national queer museum. We need to record the oppression. And that's something we might be able to talk about. But there are awful things happening overseas. I'm very involved in all those. And we Australians shouldn't just be thinking of ourselves. We should be thinking of the countries overseas, especially in our region, and especially recently where things are getting worse, not better. So there it is. The journey has been long. I'm still a young man, but we've made a lot of changes. There are more changes to be made, especially overseas, and nothing was ever changed without the help and support of straight people. Most of us come from straight parents, straight brothers, straight sisters, straight aunties, straight grandmothers, and we need to get the support and understanding and realization of the reality of science. And if that means sometimes we've got to be a little bit direct to religious people, well, so be it. So anyway, I'm very glad to be here. You didn't mention Abirami. I was Chancellor of Macquarie University, and I am the only one of the chancellors in captivity who is Chancellor Emeritus of Macquarie University. And I'm coming out to the beautiful grounds of Macquarie University in a few weeks' time to celebrate the 500th anniversary, 500th meeting of the Council of Macquarie University. So I'm still very much connected with and proud of Macquarie University, and I'm glad to be here tonight and very proud to be here with my three colleagues who are champions and heroes. And I hope you will all be champions and heroes for equality for all people, for First Nations people, for women, for people of different gender, of different race, different gender identity, for people of all disabilities. We have to learn from our lives to be friends to everybody. Equality under law means just that, everyone equal. And we are the champions of that principle.
Thank you, Your Honour. I think that's exactly what we wanted to do today, to have this discussion and to facilitate this this education of these issues. And yeah, that's kind of exactly what we wanted to do.
Yes. So raising this kind of, celebration of diversity we discussed already.
I don't promise to do exactly what you want to do. That's not my form, but I'll try. I'll try.
That's so fine. We are so happy that you're here, and that we're happy that everyone's here. So that's so fine.
So a question for all of our panel members. What are some of the best experiences you've had, embracing your identity and talking about identity, whether it's at university or in your workplace or personally? And how can we strive for some similar opportunities for our students at Macquarie as well? Danny, I see you'd like to.
Me. Mine was on Saturday. I went to the revamped Mardi Gras parade at the SCG, and I'm one of those people that thinks that it should stay there. It was brilliant. Having plumbing and food is fantastic, and I took my two kids, they're little rainbow babies. They've got 2 mums and 2 dads, and all of the love that you can imagine. And so many things when His Honour was talking about the variety of different things that are relevant to the discussion right now were ringing true just in my experience on that one night. I had the 78ers come by, and I'm explaining to my 7 and 3-year-old about these people are some of the most important people in our community because they made it okay to celebrate who we are. They are heroes. And so they're standing on their chairs and they're waving and clapping, and it was just this beautiful moment. And then the extreme diversity of our community is enormous. The number of floats with the different names of different groups, we are very good at collating together in our special interest groups. I noticed that there was, the asexuals, they were there, and just a whole variety of people, quite a few corporations as well. And the cynical side of me thinks it's a little bit commercial, but the more inclusive side of me thinks, why don't we have a float in Mardi Gras? And, it could be really cool. I was thinking, we'd have the scales of justice as a massive seesaw that we could all go around the thing. And it's awesome because it's demonstrating the diversity of who we are is extreme. It is not just your stereotypical, and I think there's a real danger of being stereotypical. Being part of this community does not mean being a white male who is in his 30s and looks fantastic. There is so much variety of everybody and every kind of demographic you can imagine. And the community event of Mardi Gras in particular on Saturday night, and being there with my children and showing them, look, we can be in that group, that's the Rainbow Families, and look, there's the gay dad pool, you can go in there with your dads, and my son's really excited to get involved next year. And being a participant and a joyful participant in this community is what I'm most grateful to the forerunners that have come before us, because I'm 37 and I didn't have to struggle in the same way as my dear Uncle Paul, who's one of my favourite people. I have a lot of favourite people in a huge family. But when I talk with Uncle Paul, he didn't have the same kinds of access to acceptance as I did. And so he poo-pooed my ideas of getting married back in the day, saying, Danny, why would you do that? That's what straight people do. We're better than that. But they don't want us in that institution. So why would you play by those rules? And then, similar to His Honour, we got married 10 years after our first ceremony that wasn't legal, where we signed mutual wills. So we were officially married, actually in Uncle Paul's backyard, and that's what it says on a marriage certificate, in Earlwood, Uncle Paul's backyard. And it's this full circle that now we're building on all of the amazing progress that's been made by the people before us, and we have to honour them. And I think the idea of a museum and a body of literature that is dedicated to celebrating those pioneers and those heroes, they're the true heroes. They make it possible for us to be in a university setting having a chat about how to be inclusive in the legal profession, the stodgiest, oldest, kind of stale profession to some, which is really not. It's vibrant, it's great, and it's inclusive, and it's got lots of really cool people in it that come from everywhere. So that was a bit of a roundabout answer to yay Mardi Gras.
Yay Mardi Gras. I think you raise a really interesting topic at the start there, where you mentioned about stereotyping and typecasting, and I think someone like Ghassan, you are of a diverse background, and we're really interested to see and hear about your thoughts on this, especially when discussing about LGBTIQ people and their experience. What are the risks of stereotyping and typecasting that we would need to address?
Well, I think the first thing is to say that everyone has their own story, and it's important to listen to the diversity of stories and give them a platform to speak. Just looking at the faces and the names that are in the room, the virtual room that we're in, and the first thing that struck me is just the immense diversity of surnames that we have in the room, from all the continents of the world. And that gives me great joy, actually, and pleasure in seeing, because empathy builds when you think about your own sense of difference and the things that you've gone through, and then you relate to other people who may not have the same difference as you, but you can appreciate what it is to be different in a world which expects certain things of all of us in different ways. And one of the things that we also have to remember is, as young people and as older people who've been given access to education and this incredible privilege that you have of, and it shouldn't be a privilege, but it is, of going to a law school, in a highly regarded law school even in Australia, where you get access to knowledge and the ability to help others, that we all have a responsibility to use that privilege in a way that gives the platform for people to be able to speak and speak for themselves. So it's really important that we don't always speak for others, but we support them to speak for themselves. From my perspective, I'm from an Arabic background, a Palestinian family. Coming out for me was a struggle with my family. I'm pleased to say that after much advocacy within my own family, we're in a very good place now. But I know, and I still see young men of Arabic background, particularly, whatever religion, but families of Christian, Muslim, or other faith-based, that really are still struggling. And we're having the debates and fights that perhaps 40 years ago, people in other cultures had. So I see that still. I see stories from conversion therapy survivors. I see violence and family violence being experienced by people within their families who still don't accept them. And I also have the privilege of working with a lot of trans people. And I think today we are seeing a fight for trans equality that is still just beginning and is years behind where we are with gay, lesbian, bisexual people's rights. So in terms of, we don't all have the same kinds of difference, but we have different differences. And remembering that, and remembering to give people the benefit of listening to what their story is, hearing it, trying to empathize, asking questions respectfully and politely. And I think earlier you asked about how to address people. And one of the biggest things that I have learned, and the real privilege of having met a lot of trans people in the work that I've done, is they inspire me to be more authentic. And, when I think about the courage that it takes to not only confront questions of sexuality, but gender, and to be authentically yourself, whatever that is, that is really inspiring. So I don't see trans people in the sense that, yes, there's a long way to go, but actually it's often the greatest privilege to see people who are struggling for that equality, because they teach you a lot about what you can do better in the world that you live in, and the privilege that you're able to use to benefit not just yourselves, although some of you may well go on to very lucrative law careers. Never forget what it was that brought you to law school in the first place, and the world that you wanted to see. And there's opportunities to make sure that that world happens, whether it's in a law firm, whether it's outside the law, whether it's working for a not-for-profit like I do now, whether it's on the bench. That would be pretty amazing as well. They're just some thoughts to start you off.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ghassan. So yes, as you discussed, I think the importance of understanding identity and the nuances that come with each individual identity, rather than just the sort of definitional perceived ideal of what a group might be, is very important in discussing these ideas. And I think as well, the opportunity to present specific services towards these groups after understanding it a bit better is always very important too. So Nicholas, for example, your firm is in a very unique position by being more specialized towards LGBTIQ plus persons. How do you think more specialized firms like yours are able to more effectively assist these clients or address these issues that are facing the LGBT community?
Well, I think it's funny because we don't actually, we're an out loud proud LGBT firm, but we don't necessarily target that community. We just see ourselves as accessible to that community and not afraid to wear our colours, so to speak. But I think there are unique areas of the law where LGBT lawyers can be of more assistance. I think in employment law, where Danny practices, I think having an understanding of the workplace issues that can arise for members of our community would definitely be of assistance, and also of assistance to the court, because if you are in litigation, often, as an officer of the court, your job is to inform the court and assist the court to come to findings of fact. And I think we are in a unique position to do that if we are acting for a member of the community and we are ourselves members of that community. I think I practice in criminal law primarily, and I generally see my clientele, unfortunately, because of oppression and hiding sexuality, often has brought about psychological problems for members of our community, and sometimes that has led to interactions with the justice system where I have to get involved. And I think I'm in a unique position to inform the court, to assist the court to understand sometimes the trauma that, say, the trans community has endured, and what might be a history of psychological illness arising from conflicts regarding sexuality or gender, and experiences with the general public or with colleagues about that. I think we can be of assistance. And of course, in family law, although I would say that the family court is generally now, it appreciates the diversity of relationships out there and understands that there can be relationships between members of the same sex, but also that sometimes there are people within our community who have simply sexual relationships and don't intend to cohabit or endure a marriage or a long de facto relationship. And I think LGBT lawyers could be helpful in that regard. My firm acted in a big same-sex friends with benefits case a few years ago, and I think it was really critical that we could be of assistance to the court to explain the diversity of relationships, and that not everyone wants to live in a married life, and two men might share a bed but may not share an intention to hold out themselves as being in a relationship. So I think we can be very helpful.
Thank you so much for that. You mentioned earlier about, workplaces as well, and how it's a very topical issue. And I think, Danny, you'll probably be the best person to answer this, but what evidence-based actions can workplaces and organizations take to ensure that there are inclusive workplaces for employees?
Look, it's easy to get, pretty formulaic about this sort of a thing, but I think that culture in an organization is where it all happens, and you have to be vigilant to make sure that you can't have discrimination or any form of nastiness developing within an organization, and you've got to stamp it out as soon as you see it. And it's not a top-down thing. This has to be part of what is ingrained in induction. This is see something, say something. This is who we are. We are good people, and good people to us looks like this. And you are now a champion for our values, and we expect you to hold everyone accountable. And Abby, you work with me, so you know that in our firm, everybody calls everybody else out on anything that they think is inappropriate. I get called out the most by everybody, and it doesn't matter where you are in the pecking order, because everybody's got a voice and you can use it. And so I think, yes, you can have the policies and the training and the special purpose groups and all of that. I was talking for a Women's Day panel the other day, and I really don't like using the label of gender as much as the label of other or queer as a disability. Let's not have this special interest group for the little women. Oh, this is for the gays, and we have to do this for them so that they feel included. No. We're all humans. We're all wanted, welcome, and respected. So just don't let anything nasty happen to anybody. Oh, there's a nice echo there from somewhere. I'll stop talking now because it might be me.
I think it's just because of like feedback. Let me just see if this helps. Does that help? Yeah, I think it does. Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much for that, Danny. I think that's a very important discussion that we really should have. Now, kind of moving on from this, I want to talk about this at a more higher level as well. And Your Honour, I think this is a wonderful opportunity as well for the students, because I know they'll be really interested in a lot of international developments. And we are really interested because you've had an amazing career in this area. So, what are some of the recent international developments that have been initiated to advance equality?
There have been many international developments that are good, some of them not so good. The greatest of them I had something to do with, and that was the decision of the Supreme Court of India in the case of Johar against the Union of India. In fact, I went to India to give a series of lectures. They were the Tagore lectures, named for the Tagore family, which includes the great Rabindranath Tagore, winner of the Nobel Prize in Literature. And the lectures were designed, as I said, to provide a new province of law for India. It coincided with when I was doing my work for the United Nations on North Korea. So there I was at the Palais des Nations in Geneva, working on North Korea, which actually doesn't have in its code, because its criminal code was borrowed from Switzerland, and it doesn't have a criminal provision against gays, but it's a pretty awful place. And I was there in India on the very day that the uncle by marriage of the supreme leader, Jiang Song-tek, was murdered by being shot at by a huge rocket to disintegrate him. He was dragged out of the Politburo, and he was disposed of because he was thought to be an enemy of the supreme leader. And I got that news, and then later in the day I got the news that the Supreme Court of India, in a case called Koshal against NAS Foundation, had reversed the decision of the Delhi High Court, which had held that Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, which criminalizes gay people, was unconstitutional under the laws of India. And that was reversed by a two-judge bench of the Supreme Court. I was so distressed by it, because I was going to India to give these lectures. And so I was trying to cope with the work I was doing on North Korea, and then this really terrible decision, which essentially wasn't a decision at all. They just said, this is a matter for Parliament, it's not a matter for the court. But the court had an obligation under the Constitution to uphold the basic rights that are stated in their Constitution. So it was a matter for the court. Anyway, the long and short of it was that there was a battle that ultimately reached the Supreme Court again. And in the case of Johar against Union of India, 5 justices of the Supreme Court of India, in a wonderful decision, unanimously held that the provisions of 377 were incompatible with the equality, equal dignity, and other provisions in the Constitution of India. Now, years before, along with a marvelous judge from South Africa, Justice Edwin Cameron. Edwin is not only was a judge of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, he's not only the only person in one of the only people, one of the very few people in Africa who is open about his HIV status, but he was also the only person in the continent of Africa in a high constitutional legal position who was open about his sexual orientation as a gay man. And he and I got in a caravan. We called it the caravan. And we went around to various high courts. They are the equivalent of our Court of Appeal in the different states, and gave lectures on what it was like being gay, and that it wasn't such a big deal, and indeed that science teaches it's so in all mammalian species, and it's just a feature of the variety, and it's part of what Charles Darwin called the rule of variation. Mammals have little variations. Some of them are tiny, tiny, some of them are not so tiny, but that's how evolution happened. So it's all part of nature's great design. And anyway, Edwin and I went around there. The judges were at first a little perplexed. To some extent, they were a bit uncomfortable. But they listened to us. They're judges, they're trained, they're lawyers, and they didn't say too much. They went away and they took it into their minds, and it's a wonderful thing, the human mind. It will play on rationality and on irrationality. And ultimately, a number of those judges were on the cases that were coming up to the Delhi High Court and the other high courts, and eventually in Johar, a number of the judges who had been in our little caravan were on the Supreme Court of India, the high equivalent to the High Court of Australia. And they wrote this wonderful, it makes me tear up to think of how wonderful were the reasons of the straight judges and upholding equality and dignity. The Chief Justice of India, Chief Justice Misra, even said there is a human right to happiness and to sexual fulfillment. Now, I love my colleagues in Australia. I loved my colleagues on the High Court of Australia, but I don't think they would find a human right to happiness or find it and write it into the law. But in the mighty Republic of India, the biggest English-speaking country in the world, these straight judges did that, and it immediately liberated millions of gay people, LGBTIQ people in India. And so, you know, when the big book is up there and I reach the pearly gates and St. Peter or St. Cuthbert or St. Ravindra is there and asks me, what did you do with your life? Oh, it's another judge. I would say I was a member, I was just a little member of a little caravan, and I didn't accept that I was second class. I knew I wasn't second class, and I went around in the caravan, and this just planted a few seeds. There was a wonderful moment in one Indian state where the Chief Justice of India at the time, Justice Verma, he was a top Brahmin, a very great lawyer and a very distinguished man. And when Edwin Cameron made his speech and talked about being positive with HIV, and he was surviving because he was a strong man and well educated and got the drugs, and he was a gay man, and he felt an obligation to speak up for others in Africa and in India and elsewhere. Justice Verma, at the end of it, got up and just embraced him. You know, he was so moved and so impressed at this judge from South Africa in the Constitutional Court of South Africa, and a Rhodes Scholar, top intellect, brilliant man, but he had told his story, and telling stories can help things change. Now, I only want to add one more thing. In this group, we don't want to assume that everybody here is LGBTIQ. People are here, and in fact, the straight people are here. I say to them, thanks to Justice Mistra, thanks to Justice Verma, thanks to gay and straight people who see that this hatred of gay people is just plain irrational and unscientific, and it has to stop. But it hasn't stopped everywhere in the world. It still is in place in a lot of places. And I love the fact that Danny said, our duty is to convey the idea, be a participant. Be a participant. The way I've sometimes explained this, be a joiner. Join civil society. Make your money, that's fine. That's what you're going to do that in law. Do your professional work to the highest possible caliber. Don't let anybody stereotype you as the gay lawyer or the gay judge or anybody else. You're first and foremost a highly professional, trained, educated person, but you've got a truth to share. And that truth is very important. And just that little thing we did in India, if I did nothing else in my life, that was a very good thing I did. And it was a very good thing that I was helped by civil society in India to do. And it's where the law is shown to be at its very finest and very best, when it's standing up for disadvantaged people. And that's why we've got to be just concerned, not just for gays and lesbians and bisexual. We've got to be concerned for the trans, as Hassan has said, and we've got to be concerned for other minorities, the First Nations people, and for other minorities, different races, different religions. And we've got to reach out to them as our friends and stand up with them and for them for equality.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Honestly, I could listen to you all day. Your stories are just so inspiring, and we're so glad that you're here. And thank you so much for sharing. That was beautiful, so beautiful.
So thank you for those wonderful insights. And I know you mentioned some of the wonderful advances that have been made for this kind of advocacy already. I'll open this next question up to the whole panel as well. What do you all think is next for LGBT reform, particularly in Australia? Where can we next see this sort of advocacy moving for our both state and our country?
I'm happy to jump in here, given it's my day job. There's actually a lot to do still. Private schools and faith-based organisations can still discriminate on the basis of sexuality and gender identity. And we've got religious discrimination protections that are being proposed at the federal level and in New South Wales that would allow discrimination against LGBTIQ plus people based on religious belief. And that has basically been imported from what we're seeing in the States at the moment and what we're seeing in parts of Europe, in particular in the UK. We still have a situation in New South Wales, in Queensland and in WA, where you still need surgery or medical treatment to be able to have a birth certificate that recognises you in the gender that you are. So to require someone to literally go through invasive surgery for a simple document that they can then use to open a bank account or to get a job is a significant indignity that continues to exist in 3 states in Australia. We don't have any laws that prohibit deferrable medical treatment on people born with variations of their sex characteristics, we call, or intersex people, before they're old enough to consent. So babies, infants are still being put under the knife in circumstances where if they were given the choice, they would be able to make a decision about what happens to their bodies rather than have that decision made for them. We just saw in Victoria and the ACT, and to a degree in Queensland, laws that deal with conversion practices, sometimes referred to as conversion therapy. But apart from those laws, there are no laws in Australia that specifically target that issue. And only just yesterday and last week have I spoken to 2 people in New South Wales that have had recent experiences of conversion-based practices, people seeking to change or suppress their sexuality or their gender identity. Hate crime laws and protections vary from state to state, and only Danny spoke about Mardi Gras this weekend. Just after Mardi Gras, we saw 2 girls, 16-year-olds, who were attacked wearing Mardi Gras costumes in Pyrmont, and a group of men be egged in Surrey Hills walking home from Mardi Gras celebrations. So unfortunately, homophobic violence and transphobic violence continues to be a reality. And so we need laws that protect all of us when those things happen, so that people can be brought to justice and that victims, survivors of these attacks, are supported.
Thank you so much for that. I think as law students as well, we should be aware of what's next, and we should be aware of the reforms that that we need to look out for. And I think it's always important to be informed. So thank you for sharing that.
Could I just make a comment on what Hassan said? It's natural that lawyers should think the law is the be-all and end-all, and that, and it is true. You've got to sort of start with the laws and get rid of the horrible laws, but that is not necessarily a formula for change. It's a precondition, but you've got to follow that up with education, with visibility, with soap operas and all the other paraphernalia to help to change people's minds. I reckon when I was growing up with my partner Jan, and we were sitting on the couch at Kirribilli watching the telly, the most important program we watched every week was number 96. This sounds, I'm so embarrassed that we were hooked to it. We were addicted to it. And I was 31 when it was on, but it had, there was only one rational person in the show. Everybody in the show was crazy and weird, but the one rational person was a person playing a gay person who had 1 or 2 of the problems of life, but he was rational, kind, sweet, handsome, and it was. I reckon that did more to help change the hatred of gay people by revealing the truth. And this is why in the coming battle, which is going to come about religious, so-called religious liberty, this is going to require quite a strategic approach, because quite a few gay people are religious. My partner Jan is very non-religious. I'm sort of Anglican, sort of semi-religious, but you know, a lot of religious people are very good people, and they are often just the product of being misled. And so we've got to have very respectful dialogue and try to reach out and tell it as it is, tell it how it feels, because when they get that message, it's hard for them to defend the belief in their religion as the source of hatred and discrimination. So I think we've got to really get beyond, as Danny says, the doing the necessary things, ticking the boxes in firms, setting up committees and having a once a year cocktail party. That's okay, and I'm not against it, but it doesn't really change the reality. It requires much more than that. And we've got to face the fact that getting into people's minds, particularly if they think God is telling them that they've got to be nasty to gays, that's a real problem. And this problem is coming. It was to have been a bill introduced by Mr. Christian Porter, but I'm not sure that he's going to be there or he's going to be doing it, but it's probably going to come up within the next few weeks. So watch this space. And it won't require ranting and raving and screaming at people. It'll require rational outreach, kindness, explaining things. And that's why I've never turned my back on my religion. And I think it's good to get gay people who are still a bit religious to say, well, this just isn't consistent with the love of God and the love of one another, which is the essence of all religions when it's boiled down. So I think, again, Danny's been right. You know, it's good that we're changing the law, good we're setting up the committees, but getting into people's minds, that's the real challenge.
Thank you so much for that, Joanna. You know, Nicholas, I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well in this discussion. Do you have any reflections on this as well?
I think I really agree with what Michael's saying. And I always, you know, when I used to watch like Spider-Man or Batman or whatever, I always kind of wanted Spider-Man or Batman's love interest to be a guy, but that also not to be a big thing. I wanted it to be natural, that maybe the protagonist in a Hollywood film fell in love with a member of the same sex. I think streaming services, particularly Stan in Australia, has great LGBT content. And I think LGBTIQA plus content sends a really clear message to the general populace that we come from all walks of life and that we should not be discriminated against. And I think that's very powerful because we are normalised, we are seen as members of families and households across Australia from all walks of life. And I do think pop culture and the media have a huge role to play. But I also think, you know, we need plurality of media. We need more voices in the media. Often certain media organisations target our community and will run a campaign for a particular group within Parliament. And I think we need voices to put the rational arguments out into the general populace.
Thank you for that, Nicholas. Yeah, we definitely agree. Visibility is a very important element into achieving some kind of meaningful advocacy and reform in this regard. And as you say, all of these, you know, just having it more evident in media and for daily sort of interaction with this kind of thing is, yeah, very important. I'd also like to hear from all panel members as well, just to sort of wrap all of this up. What is one piece of advice you'd like to give to someone who's in the beginning of law school, or to all of our students here tonight, about embracing your own identity, or just generally with beginning their career with the law? What are some kind of insights or pieces of advice you'd like to share?
Well, can I start off by saying that it isn't always easy to make that leap, and I don't like that expression "come out" much, but you know what I mean, because in a sense you're often admitting that all these years you've been dishonest to the people that matter most to you in the world. And so that's very awkward, and it's still awkward and painful. And people have to make their own pace and do things their own way. And sometimes it's harder than in other cases. But I don't think we should assume that this is something that is easy for everybody. And easy for every law student, because they're highly rational, educated people, and they mix in a circle where things are just rational. Well, the law isn't always rational. In fact, it's actually an interesting subject for a PhD thesis. Did Justice Kirby's sexuality make him a ready-born dissenter, because he knew that law wasn't always just in the way it fell out? I think that possibly is such an element. But however that may be, we've got to be supportive and respectful to other people, and reach out to them and help them and encourage them and give them love. And that makes things easier for them. And so I think what's the most important thing? I have to tell you, I was going along with the don't ask, don't tell, and my partner Johan from the Netherlands. You see, they didn't have a law against homosexual acts from 1807. So um, he told me that he had been riding into a snowstorm in Holland, and he came to the conclusion at about the age of 12. Oh, so I am gay. Oh, and he just kept driving into the snowstorm. But at a certain point, he said to me, how long are you going to be in public life? You've got to take a step. We've got to take a step. We've got to be open, and we've got to do this. And I said, well, don't you think we should wait until after I'm off the High Court, and then it won't be a distraction? And he said, no. And it was I can still see the scene. It was in the kitchen at Rose Bay, and I was sitting there, and I got quite a shock at the vehemence of his. So, I can't really take credit for doing this. We were basically open from the 1980s because of the AIDS epidemic, but we never sort of articulated it. And Jan insisted. And so and when I got to the High Court, I was completely open about it, and some of the justices were not all that happy about it. But eventually, see, he's a very good-looking, very intelligent, and very funny person. And so he would come along, and some of them would actually move place names so that they could sit next to him rather than next to some of the other spouses on the High Court. And so I think he actually played quite a good part. We can all play a part when the time comes, and we can all play the part of breaking down those stereotypes, and it does become easier. But I don't underestimate that for some people it's quite difficult, and therefore those who for whom it wasn't so difficult have to be respectful and understanding. Now, Nicholas and I, and apparently Danny, and maybe Hassan too, I don't know, we're lucky to have partners. I'm so lucky to have my partner. But not everybody has a partner. Not everybody wants a partner. And you've got to be respectful of that, as Nicholas said earlier. Some people, as Danny said, take the view, well, this is basically a straight people's convention and it doesn't really affect us. If you have a partner in the stressful business of the law, which is a very stressful job, it's a very great blessing, because you can talk things over with somebody who you can completely trust, is not going to embarrass you or cause problems. And so I can just tell from my experience, it's a very good thing to have a loving partner and who'll tell you where you're wrong and when to get out or get off and have a new thought if you can. So um, I think these are the big lessons that I've learned, and I've learned so many lessons from my partner. Now I'm going to tell you something you don't know. On the 1st of February 2021, Johan had a stroke. A stroke is a very serious medical problem. He's the same age as me, though he looks about 20 years younger because he's had a life of luxury, so I say. But he rang me and I said, we'll get an ambulance. Just stay there. The ambulance came. He was rushed to St. Vincent's Hospital. He went into emergency. He had the treatment immediately. If you're going to have a stroke in this world, the places to live are Sydney and Melbourne, because we have very good medical care. They don't ask for your credit card before they give you the treatment. And this is what he did. Now, he's now 95% cured. But it all shows you how life is brief and how love is precious and how all of us should love one another to the extent that we can love other people and be kind to other people, including people who don't agree with us or disagree with our lifestyle, that awful word, or religious people who think we're evil. We've got to find ways, reach out over and over again in the face of hostility, reach out, be a participant, be a joiner. I think if we do that, it's first of all the correct moral position, but it's also very undercutting of the people who are hostile, still hostile to gay people. And it's not nowhere near as difficult in Australia as it is in Malaysia, as it is in Afghanistan, as it is in Iran, where you can be executed. As it is in Brunei, where you can be executed. So we've got a lot going for us in Australia, but there are still things to be corrected. And it's very good if you can find a partner, but if you don't want it or you can't find a partner, well, there are other things in life, but I recommend it.
Thank you, Your Honour. You know, that was such a beautiful message, and thank you so much. That's all I could say, because I think every student here has learnt so much from you, but also the others, and the discussions that we facilitated tonight has just been amazing, and we're so appreciative that you're here tonight. So I am conscious that Johan is waiting for you, Your Honour. And you've got your
The soup is waiting for me, the soup.
Yes.
But I noticed there are some chat questions. Would you or Imogen just have a look at those before I depart and see whether or not there are any questions that I need to answer? And I should mention, for the purpose of the students at Macquarie, that I'm coming back to the law school for the new dean, Professor DeFoss, and that's going to be on the Thursday, the 25th of March. So I will be at Macquarie Law School at 6:30 that day. I think it's going to be virtual, but it's going to be non-LGBT. The LGBT may slip in. I do tend to drop it somewhere in the list, but keep that in mind. We want to have a big audience, and this because, you know, my sexuality is an important part of my identity, but it's not the whole of me. I'm a highly skilled professional lawyer who sat on the highest courts in the country and am now doing work in the United Nations for the whole world. So there's plenty to talk about, including a lot of legal stuff. And that will be what we'll be doing on the 25th of March.
Beautiful.
Wonderful. Thank you. So as Abby mentioned at the start, if you have any questions, feel free to use the raise hand feature or send them in the chat. at the moment, we've got questions that are possibly directed to Ghassan. So on the subject of trans rights, how do you see the development of minors seeking social and or medical transition, especially without the support of parents or guardians? And this question is from Leo Thomasy.
Thanks for that question. So currently, the standard position with treatment for young people under 18 is that as they gain maturity, what we call Gillick competent or Gillick competence, they get to take over from their parents in terms of being able to consent to their own medical treatment, except for certain circumstances, and one of them currently is around the treatment for gender dysphoria. So young people who are seeking access to puberty blockers, which delays puberty to give them time to think about what they might like to do next in terms of alleviating the distress of going through puberty in a body that doesn't align with their gender, and later on hormones, which would help them affirm the gender that they see, will need the support of both parents unless they go to a court for approval. Unfortunately, that position really means that, and if we look at the statistics for young people who are trans, we're talking about suicide attempts of 1 in 2. So the access to healthcare and this life-saving access of that healthcare for dealing with the distress that they feel going through a puberty that doesn't align with their gender is a huge health issue for trans young people today. We're actually involved at Equality Australia with some cases that will hopefully test that law, but it is a long way to go, and there's a lack of understanding often around issues around gender dysphoria, gender identity, the treatment for it, and the circumstances in which that treatment's provided. There's been some rather troubling developments in the UK as well, which we're starting to see the ripple effects of in Australia, not in the law yet, but in the way that clinics that provide this treatment are being more cautious in offering their services without the imprimatur of a judge. And generally speaking, we think people should have control over what happens to their bodies, and that these kinds of decisions are best done with the advice of a doctor, not the advice of a lawyer. So that's sort of where it's at the moment.
Thank you so much for that. I think we've also got another question. Ethan? Hey, Ethan. I think you're muted.
Hello. Yes. Hi. I've got a question. I note that it was also kind of mentioned in the chat, but I just wanted to find out, in what ways can Australian surrogacy laws change to better support rainbow families hoping to have children, who currently are kind of subject to the will of the birth mother on, wanting to sign a consent order to, give over the child?
Open to the panel, so anyone who's willing to answer.
Look, that's not my area, but I did want to just jump in and say I have the fortunate experience of being with a woman when we conceived with a gay couple, and we as a family unit, it's parenting by committee, but the 4 of us, we have a parenting agreement. We went through about 2 years of counselling before we got pregnant, and as a family model, I can recommend something a little bit different, which is just making a really big family. But I've got a lot of gay male friends who are having to jump through the most incredible hoops to create a family, and it's very expensive and scary. So, but I don't know what the law is. I'm an employment lawyer. I'm one trick pony. Richard?
The laws vary from state to state. Some states allow what's called altruistic surrogacy, that is surrogacy effectively without payment or reward to any of the people being involved. And some states also criminalise commercial surrogacy, including commercial surrogacy undertaken overseas. So what we've seen are cases that have gone to the family court with children that have been born under arrangements that are questionable in terms of legal status. And what's happened is that children have sometimes been denied the recognition of their intended parents. And that will then flow on to that child's right to inherit, for example, who makes decisions about the child's consent for medical treatment, those sorts of parental responsibilities. I don't think the answer is to just take a child away from a birth mother and just strip her of her rights. And I think that's a real problem that we've seen overseas. I think that we can be smarter than that. I think we can protect women who are giving an incredible gift to another couple or another person and having a child. And I think that those laws can change in a way that recognizes the various people who are involved and ultimately needs to recognize the best interests of the child in having their family recognized, however that family is constituted. Because at the end of the day, if you want security for a child, then recognizing the reality of their family means that things like child support, things like family law, things like inheritance, superannuation, all those sorts of rights that come, the financial rights that come from recognition will flow to that child eventually. And also the responsibilities of parents are recognized for that child's welfare. It's a difficult question, and I think the ACT are looking at some reforms around surrogacy, particularly, but where it comes to commercial surrogacy, there's some other models overseas, but I don't think we should see a situation where we just have some of the situations we see overseas where basically there's an agreement and the woman who carries the baby just has no real say or rights in what happens. And we have a view in Australia that those agreements are not binding, except potentially in respect of some of the financial aspects, like giving reasonable expenses for maternity leave and things like that, or support with pregnancy expenses or time away from work. So there is a very strict regime around how that is regulated in New South Wales. But there are parenting orders that are available to people who go through the altruistic system currently in New South Wales. So it's worth looking at that as well.
Thank you so much. That was really, really insightful. That was really, really good. Thank you so much. So we've got one from the chat below. So this is to the panel, and perhaps Your Honour and Nicholas, you could answer this question. So to the panel, what has been your motivation for studying and working in the legal industry?
Well, in my own case, I was asked at the North Strathfield Public School by two men who came in grey coats from the Department of Education, what do you want to be when you grow up? I was then aged about 8, I think, and I said I want to be a bishop or a judge. So I was determined to get into fancy dress. So that was the first criterion, fancy dress. And the second was I was not quite so good in mathematics, though in the end, in the leaving certificate, I came top of the state in history and top of the state in general mathematics. So I didn't do too bad. I had a wonderful teacher at Fort Street High School who taught me to rather like mathematics. But my real strength was English and history, and I was good at talking and debating. And so going into law was a sort of natural thing. And the school had a lot of lawyers who were judges and so on. So I was just a creature of habit and tradition, I suppose. But I think people who are good at English and history and verbal skills do tend to be ready-made to be lawyers. People who are good at science and mathematics tend to go off into other things. And the idea of cutting up rats and even human bodies really put me off. I didn't like that idea at all. So that's why I ended up as a lawyer. But I've never regretted it. I mean, then I found law at its essence is about justice. It doesn't always achieve it, but we do have a role in achieving it. And that is a wonderful thing, to spend your life searching for it. Some people I know were never all that interested in it, but it was always a big motivation for me. And I do think my sexuality made me aware that law is not always so great. Uh, and for many people and many minorities, it's not great at all. And therefore, that there's plenty of work there to try to make law better. So that's how I drifted into law.
I think one thing we have in common, Your Honour, is perhaps our distaste for the sciences. That was physics for me, and I was quite good at English, so that's also why I decided to pursue law. So one thing in common there. Nicholas, did you have any insights on this question as well?
I think, I hate to say it, but I think I am also a creature of my environment. My dad was a lawyer. He didn't practice law, but he has a law degree, and I think he gave me that love for the English language and the love for history, but also made me want to explore how society is regulated. And the law is, there's this philosophical question as to whether society changes the law or law changes society. And I think I wanted to be part of that conversation and practice in that realm. But now I think I am a bit of a justice warrior. I want to be able to use my privilege to affect change through social change effectively. And I think having legal training empowers me to do that.
Thank you so much. I think we've got just one question here for Your Honour. So this is from Nicholas Chambers. In a time where there was so much discrimination and hatred towards people of the LGBTIQ plus community, how did you find the courage to speak out with the risk of losing what you worked for?
Well, I don't know that I did have that courage. And I don't know many people of my age and in those generations who did have that courage. Don't forget that just before I went to the bar, the Attorney General of New South Wales was a really nice man, Reg Downing. He was the Labor Attorney General. And he came to the view that there was an epidemic of homosexuality in the state, and that it was necessary to reopen the old Cooma jail and fill it with gay people. This is a very nice man in the Labor government filling a reopened jail at Cooma with gay people. And so that was the reality of the world I was mixing in. And in fact, I had cases against him because Labor lost the election and the coalition were elected, and the Cooma jail was full up anyway with gay men. And but this was the reality. So it was wise to be silent. Now, I was never deceitful in the sense of, having somebody, having a woman friend who would come along to functions, but I wasn't fully honest. And that was what was required of me. That was what was the don't ask, don't tell. And if I had been out and proud, as we say now, I would have got nowhere. I would have been killed. They would have said, he's very unreliable. He's clever, but very unreliable. And he's a poof. So these were the days. And that's why when I met my wonderful partner, and we were just coming close to 30. I thought I was going to be left on the shelf at the age of 30, and it was going to be a terrible, sad, pathetic life. And Johan went to the Rex Hotel in the King's Cross. He only did it twice, and on the second occasion, he met me. I mean, talk about the lucky dip. So we were really a pretty self-contained unit. He met my parents a fortnight after that, and it wasn't verbalized, but he came along every Sunday night for dinner. And when my mother was dying, years and years and years later, I felt I've not been totally honest to my mum, and I must be honest to her. And so I said to her, Mum, I've got something I have to tell you. And she said, uh, I didn't come down in the last shower. You've been bringing Johan here every Sunday for 30 years. Mothers know and fathers know. It's a question of whether it's articulated. But I felt a need to articulate it to my mother. My father knew, my brothers knew, my sister, who was a revolutionary, she knew. But it's not so easy in some families as it was in mine. And these are just the journeys that we've been taking. This is why we have to have a queer national museum, to tell these stories before people like me have died and the stories are lost. They've got to be told, because it's like if you go to the Sydney Jewish Museum and you see the Holocaust and you hear the oppression. Our oppression in Australia, at least, has never been like what the Jewish people went through with the Holocaust. But our oppression was bad enough, and it ought to be recorded, because otherwise people will open prisons or do horrible things to people. And we've got to tell people, if this can happen to gays, and if people can remain silent like Justice Kirby, then what are the things we're doing that we're not recognising and speaking up for today? That's why we all ought to be champions for First Nations people, and for people of colour, and for people of different races, and Asian Australians, and for people with disabilities. And we've got to be champions for all of these. And then when we're finished with ourselves, we've got to get involved with APCOM, a body of which I'm a patron, based in Tokyo, which is designed to choose champions across Asia and the Pacific. And, their stories are just so absolutely wonderful, and their courage is so magnificent. And they stand up in circumstances where it's very dangerous, but they stand up. And so we've all got to be involved with others, and with ourselves and our families. And I extend best wishes to you all, and I thank the organisers of this event. It's a wonderful thing you've done. I thank the straight people who are watching and have been here. I thank the LGBTIQA plus minorities, and I hope we get a big crowd on Thursday, the 25th of March, when there will be a change of scenery. But do the best you can with your own life, and make the most of your life, and search for love and happiness, and for fulfillment, and for doing good things for others in the law.
Thank you, Your Honour, for sharing such beautiful personal insights. We're all very appreciative that you could be here tonight and share such wonderful stories with all of us. And I think it's a very beautiful message of inclusivity and acceptance and pride for us all to end on tonight. It's been a very productive, and we've covered a lot of ground tonight, but I think everyone here has definitely learned a lot. And we're all, as Abby has said before as well, very, very grateful that you could be here and share such insightful.
Thank you, Imogen, and thank you, Birami. And we've had a few laughs and a few tears, and that's what life is all about. Thank you all, and good luck with your studies.
Thank you all. Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Ghassan. Thank you, Nicholas. And thank you, everyone, for attending. All the best, and good night, everyone. See you.
Thank you.